Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Kathleen Carter-Bell and I teach oboe at Auburn University. In this video, I wanted to talk with you about the 2022 Alabama Middle School All-State Etudes. So I'm going to start with the lyrical etude. This year's lyrical etude comes from the Rubank Advanced Method Oboe Book, Volume 1, and this is going to be number 8 on page 26. This etude actually does not originally come from this book, but it comes from this book, which is the Barrett Oboe Method. And if you have not seen this before, definitely take a look and try and get a copy, because this is really important for oboe players, and it's going to come back again and again over the time that you are playing the oboe. As you are preparing the lyrical etude this year, you only need to play the top line, and you do not need to do any repeats for this etude. And there's also a change in the tempo marking that is recommended, and it is changed. Instead of 104, it's brought down to 84. So in addition to taking note of the tempo, there are a few other things that you want to look out for early as you're working on these etudes. And one of those things is the key. So make sure you know what the key is in any etude that you're playing. And in this case, we have F major. So make sure you're practicing your F major scale along with the etude. Another thing that I think is really helpful to identify early on are the characters, or what do you want your audience to be thinking about or feel as you're playing this. If you don't have any idea, your audience probably won't have any idea either. So it's really important. I want you to choose your own characters and make up your own stories and your own ideas for this. But just to get you started, here are a few ideas. So this melody is meant to be lyrical and smooth. And so one of the things that always helps me when I'm trying to make things more smooth, more connected, is to think of a wheel, which is turning like this. It has highs, it has lows. I reach up, I reach down. So make sure when you have notes that go up, you're reaching up, and when you have notes that are down, you reach down. Another character that you might want to envision for this etude is flying or leaping weightlessly from cloud to cloud, or something really evocative like that. I choose to think of that weightlessness in this etude to some extent because I don't want to just really land very hard on every single downbeat. Take a look at the first 4 bars. We have one note that keeps coming back just a whole lot over the course of this etude, and that is our middle C, 2-finger C, which we all know that's not the friendliest note on the oboe. We want to make it our friend, but we also don't want to make sure that everyone hears, oh wow, that's a C, every single time we come back to it. So try to make sure that we don't become seasick over the course of this etude. The way that we do that is we try to make sure that they all have a different amount of emphasis. So again, these first 4 bars, T, da 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 dee, da 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 dee, da da dee dum, ba. What you didn't hear me sing was T, da 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 dee, da 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 dee, da da dee dum, da, which sounds a lot more heavy. It sounds weighted down when we just give every downbeat basically the same amount of emphasis. So a good way to practice this is to leave out all the little notes and just play the downbeat of each bar, but try and make sure that they all sound a little different. So they're all within the hierarchy of this first phrase, which is the first 4 bars. T, T, da, bum, be, something like that. Another tricky thing about this etude can be the slurs up and especially the slurs down. So take a look at the first measure on the second line. We have a string of eighth notes together, and we have a very big drop between our E and our G. There are a couple of things that we can do in order to make our slurs down more effortless. So the first thing is that we don't want to blow hard into the bottom note, which I know seems like the natural thing to do in order to get it out would be to push on it. But that actually doesn't work very well. What we want to do is make sure that we are voicing, which if you haven't heard that term before, it's basically using our voice like a singer does in order to sing high notes, or in this case, lower notes. So I want everybody to go, oh, as if you're singing a really low note, and feel what that feels like in your throat, what you do with your jaw. That is going to help any low notes that you play come out more easily. Whereas if you keep your jaw and your voice in the same place as if you're singing a high note, ta-da-dee-ta-da-da, it's very up, and that makes it much harder to get those low notes out. So we are not going to blow into the low notes, and we are going to voice for them. The other thing that you can do is isolate just the E down to the G, and do that over and over until you can get it very seamlessly. It's a pretty fast turnaround from the E down to the G, so we have to make sure that it's going to come out beautifully right when we need it. It's always really important to identify the phrasing in music. Phrases are like musical sentences. So when you're writing or when you're talking, the way that we put our sentences together really matters. And it's the same in music. We need to make sure that the way we put them together makes sense, and in this case, musical sense. And so basically, this etude is in 4-bar phrases. So there are 4 measures per big overall phrase. So on the first line, the first big phrase ends after that half note C, about halfway through. And the second phrase ends after the half note C in bar 8. Let's talk about bar 4. So we have this idea a few times in this etude where we have a quarter note followed by a half note with an accent over the top. What we want to do is we want to make this seem very natural. And in this lyrical etude, we're not going to just slap that last C, right? We want to make it sound round and lifted. So the G before it needs to seem like kind of like a trampoline to the half note C that comes after. Bumpy, bumpy. That has lift and that has direction. Boppy, boppy. Sounds much flatter. So whenever I'm trying to think of making a certain note round and giving it shape, I think of different syllables. And so in this case, I'm thinking of the syllable B-O-M, bom, because there is an M at the end of that syllable, which is going to help me round out that note really nicely and be able to move on to the C. There are a few measures in this etude that have added flats or some natural signs as well. So take a look at line 3, the first and second bars. We want to make sure that we give enough emphasis to those flatted notes. And the same thing on the last line as well. Those notes are interesting. And so we want to bring them out because they're helping us progress. Something new is happening. So make sure that those are important moments. There are a few grace notes in this etude. So in bar 8 and in the very last bar of the whole etude, we find a few right before our final notes there, or before a half note. Take the time to place these. You can do a little bit of a lift at the end of the previous bar in order to very beautifully place these grace notes right before those half notes. It's okay to take a little bit of time right there because we are at the end of phrases. That's absolutely fine, and it sounds more stylistic than which sounds kind of squished together. The other one sounds like it fits this character that we identified of flying or some kind of a beautiful circular wheel as well. Make sure that the bar lines are not influencing your phrasing. We use bar lines to help us keep track of the meter in music, but don't let those big lines in between the music influence your phrasing and your musicality. For instance, in the first line, we want it to sound that circular. We don't want to kind of take bar by bar as if it's completely separate from what comes after it. Dee da da dee da da dee da 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 dee da dum. B doesn't sound as good as if we use the eighth notes at the end of a bar to lead into the next downbeat. Da 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 dee da da dee da 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 dee dum B. So make sure that you aren't dividing things up just because there's a bar line. Make sure there's a reason. Probably the most important piece of advice that I can give you on this or any etude that you're preparing is to sing it. It does not matter if you are a good singer. Do your best with hitting all of the right notes, but the most important thing is to make it sound as natural as possible. If you can do that when you're singing it, you can translate that to oboe playing as well. This year's technical etude also comes from the Rubank book, and it is number 20, which spans from pages 50 over to page 51. Remember that you do not need to do the repeat, so make sure at the very end that you go to the second ending and not the first ending. The recommended tempo for this etude is dotted quarter note equals 112, so go ahead and get your metronome out and check out what that sounds like. Now remember, when it comes time for your audition, if 112 is seeming a little bit too fast for you to play this accurately and with musicality, that you can bump it down a little bit, and that is not a problem. It's much better to play something slightly slower and accurately and beautifully than it is just to play it fast but very messy and without all of the musical things that we work so hard to try to get into the piece. The composer gives us some information at the beginning of this etude. It is titled Allegro Rustico, which means fast and sort of rustic sounding, so kind of natural, almost country-like. And this is emphasized by the meter that is written, which is 6/8. A 6/8 meter is very often used when a composer wants something to sound like nature or pastoral, so like we're walking through the woods or walking through a field or something. These 6/8 meters, or maybe you've come across 12/8 meters, all kind of feel like that. They have some curve to them. So make sure you incorporate that into your style as you're working on this etude. Just like with the lyrical etude, make sure that you pick your characters early. In this one, I like to tell myself a story. Due to the nature of the relatively fast tempo, I think that I'm flying through the country on horseback. So I'm riding a horse through nature, and the trees are flying by, and I'm just having the best time with the wind in my face. And that helps me get this kind of rocking motion as if I'm riding a horse like this. And that helps me keep moving with the tempo as well. So come up with your own story that makes sense to you. 6/8 meters need to feel like they are in a big 2 rather than in 6 beats. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's going to give it that proper rocking motion that we need. This etude starts with a pickup into the first note. We have a low F pickup note. And so this first F really needs to feel like a step forward into the next measure. It really needs to feel like you're literally like picking up your foot and moving forward. Ta-ti. Also before you start, and this goes for everything that you will play in your entire lives, you should subdivide before you start. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ta-ti is what you should be thinking rather than ta-ti. It doesn't help you to just launch into it You need to think of the little beats that will help you maintain your tempo. It will help everything be steadier, and everything will just fall much more into place if you do that subdivision initially. Do the work of identifying your phrasing. You can sing it in order to help you identify those phrases, but most of the phrases in this case are going to be 4 bars. So try to make sure all of your musicality falls into that overall structure. There are some places in this etude where you're going to want to decide which kind of F that you need to use. For instance, in the second line, leading from the second to the third bar, we have 2 Fs, which are then going to go down to a D. If you're playing regular F, which is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, little banana key, or I've also heard it called a taco key, because it kind of looks like that. If this is the F that you're playing, regular F, you're going to have to hop to get down to D, which is going to make a little space in the music. We also have our forked F, which is where we have all these down, but our middle finger is lifted here. And some of your oboes may have a side F or a left F, as we call it. So for a left F, you'll have these 3 fingers down and your first 2 fingers down, just like you do for our regular F there. But instead of pressing this little banana or taco key, there is this key that is on the very side of your instrument. Now, some student oboes don't have that. And so I would encourage you, if you're ever looking into buying your own oboe, make sure that it has this side F key. It is going to make your life so much easier to have this additional option for Fs, because our forked Fs often don't sound that great on our oboes. The side F is really important. So take one more look here. It's near our low B and B flat keys. It's just hanging out on top there. And I would recommend using that in a lot of cases, particularly when you're trying to go from Ds up to F, where you're gonna have to make a little gap unless you use forked F. If you don't have that side F key, using your forked F is a good option here. So just make sure you know when you're using it. I like to write into my music when I'm using forked F, I put a little X, and when I'm using my left F, I put a little L. Another really important feature of this whole etude is articulation. And obviously from the very beginning, we have a lot of staccato markings. We have mixed in some mixed articulation, which is where we have slurs interspersed with articulated notes like staccatos. You can see some of those on the second line. Let's talk about the staccato only sections first. Because of the tempo, I play these articulations on the wind, which means I take a breath in and I'm blowing, and basically as far as my lungs and my support and my air are concerned, I am just playing a whole note. The only thing that's changing is maybe I give it a little bounce from down here with my abdominal muscles, but my tongue is just gonna bisect the air as I go through. Ta ti ta 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 ti ta ta ta. That's gonna help me get that nice articulation that seems very light. If we try to give every single one of those staccato notes its own bounce, ta ti ta ta ti ta ta ta, we get tired really quickly. And it's very hard at these faster tempos to keep that up. So try out this on the wind style articulation. The way I want you to practice that is you play a whole note, and then after you've played 4 beats of a whole note, then I want you to articulate ta, 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 quarter notes. Just imagine that your air is still holding a whole note, but your tongue just gets in the way of that, like skipping rocks over the water. Then once you've got that down, you can articulate in eighth notes, ta, 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 and you can get this faster and faster until it would feel natural for this etude to do staccato eighth notes at 112. Then we have those mixed articulation passages. There are a few key ideas that we want to keep in mind for mixed articulation. We want to make sure that we don't mess with the rhythm whenever we have slurs followed by articulations. The rhythm has to stay the same. Make sure you don't clip the last slurred notes. We don't want to play dee da dee da dee, which interrupts our line, makes it very uneven. And then we also want to make sure that all of our articulations match. So if you have articulated notes, they all need to sound the same. Just like with the lyrical etude this year, there are some slurs down in this technical etude as well. For instance, on the second page, on the fourth line, we have some descending figures from octave F down to our B flat. And it's very easy to crack in between some of these notes. So make sure that you are voicing T-yaw, T-yaw, T-yaw. Say T-yaw as you're playing these to help that second note come out. And make sure you're not pushing into that second note either, because that also will kind of make you hit a wall with them and they might not come out as well. It's better to back off for the second note than it is to blow into them. Another really easy pitfall of this etude comes in the transition from the first page, page 50, up to the top of page 51. There are a whole string of little eighth note rests here. It is very easy to slow down in the rests. Make sure that you're still subdividing and keeping things moving along, because otherwise every one of those rests might just gradually increase in time, which is going to slow you down overall, and it's going to make this whole passage, instead of sounding exciting and invigorated and like it's leaping forward, is actually going to fall back. And we don't want to do that energy-wise in this section. On lines 2 and 3 on page 51, we have our first 16th notes of this etude. So this is a slightly different figure that we haven't had before. Try to make sure that those 16th notes are leading to the following downbeat. We don't need to make a huge deal about them. They are there to help us move forward to that octave F and then that low F afterwards. We have a forte group of them, followed by a piano group of them. So make sure that you make a really big contrast there. That's another thing that's going to make this etude sound very exciting. Thank you for tuning in and watching this video. I hope that it's been helpful for you. If you have any questions about these etudes or the oboe in general, please feel free to reach out. Happy practicing and good luck with your auditions.